Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
I am so excited to get into this one with you today.
Yeah, because we have a really intense deep dive today. I mean, I want you to imagine sitting in a freezing stone prison cell. Right?
Oh, man. Just the worst possible situation.
Exactly. And you know you are scheduled to be brutally executed. But here's the kicker. You are there for doing the absolute right thing.
Right. You didn't commit a crime at all.
No. You defended the innocent. You upheld the law, and your reward is a literal death sentence. Meanwhile, the corrupt officials who framed you, they are currently living in palaces, wearing silk, and the public is just praising them.
It's sickening, honestly.
It is. And you have to ask yourself in that moment, looking at the damp walls of your cell, if there is a good, all-powerful force governing this universe, how is it possible that virtue is actively punished while pure wickedness is just handed the keys to the kingdom?
It's probably the most visceral, painful contradiction of the human experience, isn't it?
No, absolutely.
The prosperity of the wicked. And, the man sitting in that cell didn't just passively wonder about it. He tore the concept down to its foundational studs to find an answer.
So we are diving deep into Book 4 of the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius today.
Yeah, and we should clarify, this isn't some abstract thought experiment.
Right, this is a survival manual. It was written by a man who was moments away from losing his life. And our mission today is to take his crisis, take the really profound kind of mind-bending answers he discovered, and figure out how they apply to you listening right now.
Because, whether you are dealing with, say, a toxic boss who keeps getting promoted, or you're just watching blatant corruption win on the evening news, Boethius is speaking directly to your frustration.
Yeah, he really is. But to really grasp the gravity of what we are unpacking, we need to understand exactly what Boethius lost.
Oh, he lost everything. We are talking about a man who was effectively the prime minister of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
This was under King Theodoric in the early 6th century.
Right, the master of the offices.
Exactly. He had immense wealth, unparalleled education, universal respect. He practically spent his whole life trying to integrate the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle into a functional, ethical government.
So he was the classic good guy, but operating at the absolute highest levels of power.
Yeah, and because he was good, he stood in the way of these corrupt courtiers. They were trying to confiscate the estates of wealthy Romans, and Boethius defended the innocent.
Which obviously put a target on his back.
Right. So in retaliation, those same courtiers fabricated charges of treason against him. They even accused him of practicing dark magic.
Wow, just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
And King Theodoric, who's, growing paranoid in his old age, he believed the lies. Overnight, Boethius was stripped of his titles, his property, separated from his family.
And thrown into a dungeon in Pavia. That whiplash alone would destroy a person's mind, right? To go from the pinnacle of society to a death row inmate solely because you acted with integrity.
Which is exactly why when he writes this text, he isn't offering some polite, detached academic theory.
Right. He's bleeding onto the page.
He is. He structures the book as a dialogue between himself in his darkest hour and a personified figure of philosophy who sort of appears to him in his cell.
And when Book 4 opens, Boethius has just finished listening to philosophy explain the nature of true happiness, but he actually interrupts her.
Yeah, he's grieving. He is indignant. Mm-hmm. He essentially says, look, I hear you, but none of this matters if the universe is fundamentally broken.
His complaint is so deeply relatable. He points out that it would be one thing if evil merely existed, right? We can sort of wrap our minds around a flawed world.
Sure, nobody expects perfection.
But it's the act of injustice that shatters his faith. Virtue isn't just ignored, it is cast down and trampled in the mud. Wickedness isn't just present, it sits on a throne, wearing a crown, literally dictating the terms of reality.
He articulates the ultimate crisis of faith and logic right there. He tells philosophy that this happens under the rule of a God who supposedly knows all things, can do all things, and wills only the good. Well, it cannot be sufficiently wondered at or lamented.
It feels like a cosmic betrayal. So philosophy is standing in this damp cell with a man who has lost everything, who is furious at the architecture of the universe. How does she even begin to respond to that level of justified outrage?
Well, she responds with a complete inversion of his reality.
Meaning what, exactly?
She doesn't offer a platitude. She doesn't just say, endure this now for a reward in the afterlife.
Right, no cheap comforts.
Exactly. She addresses his premise directly and tells him that his assumptions about who is actually winning and losing are entirely backward.
She claims that if the universe actually operated the way he thinks it does, where the good are weak and the wicked are strong, it would be a monstrous, terrifying place. But she promises to prove that it just isn't so.
And the specific metaphor she uses here is just brilliant. She tells him she is going to attach wings to his mind.
Wings. I love that. What does she mean by that, practically?
It's a crucial metaphor. She is basically telling Boethius that his perspective is too low. He's looking at the world from the mud, judging power by who has the most gold or the sharpest sword.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so she needs to elevate his mind, give it wings, so he can view human action from a teleological perspective, meaning looking at the ultimate end or purpose of a human being.
Okay, so she's going to prove, using rigorous logic, 3 radical paradoxes, right? That the good are always strong, the bad are always utterly powerless, and that vices never go unpunished.
That's the promise.
Yeah.
But it sounds impossible.
Yeah, I have to stop you there and challenge this on behalf of our listeners, because claiming the bad are powerless feels like a total denial of physical reality.
I know. It sounds crazy first.
Let's look at a modern scenario, okay? You have a billionaire CEO who actively lies to regulators, destroys the environment, and crushes the whistleblowers who try to expose him.
Okay, classic bad guy.
Right. And that CEO is currently sunning himself on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the whistleblower is bankrupt, blacklisted, and struggling to feed their family. You cannot look at that situation and tell me the CEO is weak and powerless. He has the literal power to destroy lives.
And that is the exact friction philosophy expects Boethius and us to feel. From a material standpoint, sure, the CEO has immense power.
Right. So how does she counter that?
Well, she forces us to define what power actually is in relation to human nature. She establishes a foundational equation for any human action. She says for any action to be successfully accomplished, you require 2 distinct components, will and power.
Okay, will being the desire to do it, and power being the capacity to pull it off.
Precisely. If you lack the will, you don't even attempt the action. If you lack the power, you might have the will, but your attempt is in vain. You fail.
Makes sense.
So if we see a person striving with all their might for a specific goal, but they never actually achieve it, we can objectively conclude they lack the true power to get it.
Okay, the logic holds. Like, if my goal is to lift a 2-ton boulder, my will is entirely focused on the boulder, but my body fails to move it. My failure proves my lack of power.
Now, philosophy takes that equation and applies it to the universal human condition. She asks, what is the ultimate goal of every single human being? What is the boulder everyone is trying to lift?
And what does she say it is?
The text establishes that every person, good or bad, is universally striving for one thing: happiness. And Boethius previously defined true happiness as the absolute good.
So going back to my example, the corrupt CEO and the whistleblower actually share the exact same underlying motivation.
Yes, exactly.
They both wake up in the morning and make their respective choices because they believe those choices will result in their ultimate happiness.
Their will is identical. The divergence happens in their methodology. The good attempt to reach happiness through the natural action of virtue, honesty, integrity, justice.
These are the natural pathways designed to lead a human being to the absolute good.
Right. The bad, however, try to attain that exact same happiness through what the text calls concupiscence, which basically translates to unnatural lust, greed, manipulation, and selfish desire.
I want to dig into the analogy the text uses to illustrate this because it bridges the gap between ancient philosophy and our modern intuition beautifully. Philosophy asks Boethius to imagine the physical act of walking.
Yeah, walking is the natural motion of the human body, right? Yeah. Designed to transport us from point A to point B.
So let's picture 2 people trying to cross a room. The first person simply uses their feet and walks. The second person, for whatever reason, decides they are going to try to cross the room by walking on their hands.
It's an absurd image, but it really isolates the concept.
It does, because you have to ask, who is the stronger walker? The person using their natural capacity, or the person struggling, sweating, and failing to do it in a completely unnatural way?
Obviously, the one using their natural capacity, their feet, is undeniably stronger at the task.
And philosophy maps this directly onto the pursuit of happiness. The supreme good is the finish line across the room.
Exactly.
The virtuous person uses the natural action of human nature, virtue, to get there. The wicked person is trying to reach the supreme good by walking on their hands.
Yeah, they are using greed, theft, and cruelty, which are unnatural ways of attaining good. Therefore, the wicked person is fundamentally weaker at being human.
This leads to philosophy's radical conclusion about your CEO on the yacht, doesn't it?
It does. The wicked are attempting to reach the goal of human nature in a way that is utterly contrary to nature. Because of this, they are entirely impotent.
Wow. Impotent.
Yes. They scheme, they steal, they consolidate material power, but they never actually attain the absolute stable happiness they're desperately aiming for. They're constantly failing at their primary objective.
So the CEO might have the power to buy a yacht, but he lacks the power to secure the happiness the yacht was supposed to bring him. His material strength is just masking a profound existential impotence.
And philosophy actually goes even further. She argues that by forsaking the common end of all things, virtue and true happiness, the wicked actually cease to exist in a complete sense.
Okay, that phrase, cease to be at all, is jarring. It makes me think of, like, a dead battery.
A dead battery, how so?
Well, if I hold a AA battery that has completely lost its ability to hold a charge, my eyes tell me it's still a battery. It has the metal casing. It has the positive and negative terminals. It fits perfectly into the back of my remote control.
Right, it looks the part.
But because it has lost the essential capacity to perform its defining function, which is providing power, it is no longer truly a battery. It's just a decorative piece of metal.
That captures the ontological argument Boethius is making perfectly. Philosophy actually uses the metaphor of a corpse.
A corpse. Okay, that's intense.
She says, when you look at a deeply wicked person, you shouldn't just call them a man. You call them a bad man. Much like when you look at a corpse, you call it a dead man.
Oh, because you cannot call it simply a man anymore.
Exactly, because it has lost the animating essence that defines its nature. To truly exist requires maintaining your proper place and keeping your nature. When you abandon goodness, you abandon the existence that is essential to who you are.
That fundamentally shifts the definition of evil. We so often treat the capacity to do evil as a kind of dark superpower, like the villain in a movie who operates outside the rules and therefore has more options.
But Boethius is arguing that the capacity to do evil is actually a symptom of weakness.
It is the ultimate weakness. Supreme goodness, by definition, can do all things, but it cannot do evil. Therefore, if a person resorts to evil, it proves they lack the strength to achieve their goals through good.
If they have the power to continue in virtue, they wouldn't need to lie, cheat, or steal. Their cruelty is a public admission of their inability to function as a healthy human being.
This requires a massive psychological reframing for anyone dealing with a toxic boss, an abuser, or a political tyrant. And there's a poem in this section, Song 2, that just strips away the visual intimidation of tyrannical power.
Song 2 is a masterpiece of psychological deconstruction. It describes a monarch sitting on a high throne. He's wearing purple robes. He is surrounded by guards with flashing steel. His face is fierce and his commands are absolute.
From the outside, he is the terrifying embodiment of power.
But the poem invites the listener to mentally strip away the state vesture, tear off the purple robes, ignore the guards. If you look at the man underneath, you see someone in heavy chains.
So the tyrant is actually a slave to his own passions.
Exactly. Philosophy identifies these chains. She says lust poisons his mind, sudden rage sweeps over him like a storm, deep sorrow vexes his spirit, and he is constantly deluded by empty hopes.
So he projects absolute control over his kingdom, but internally, he is a hapless wretch oppressed by many tyrannical lords, which are his own vices.
He is entirely helpless to do what he truly wants, which is to be at peace, because he is in total thraldom to his emotional chaos.
The implication for the listener here is profound. When you are intimidated by someone who wields malicious power, you are being tricked by the flashing steel and the purple robes of their status.
Right. You're buying into the illusion.
Beneath that status, they are walking on their hands. They are dead batteries. They are completely enslaved to the insecurities, paranoia, and greed that make them toxic in the first place. Their power over you might be physically real, but their power over themselves is non-existent.
And understanding that impotence changes how we perceive the universe's justice. Which brings us to the next massive obstacle Boethius must overcome.
The rewards and punishments piece.
Yeah, because even if we accept that the bad are internally weak and the good are internally strong, Boethius's original cry in the dark was about real-world rewards and punishments. He is still going to be executed, and his accusers are still going to inherit his wealth.
Right, and we all have a deep-seated craving for visible justice. We want the good guy to get the medal on stage and the bad guy to be led away in handcuffs. The injustice of Book 4 is that the material outcomes are completely inverted.
So philosophy has to elevate the entire concept of reward and punishment above material outcomes. She asks us to remember the fundamental premise. Why do we do anything?
We do it for happiness.
And we've established that the virtuous attain true happiness because they pursue it through the natural path of goodness.
They achieve the absolute good.
Therefore, the prize of the good person is the goodness itself. It is an intrinsic, inseparable reward. An emperor can confiscate your bank account, he can strip you of your titles, he can throw you in a dungeon, and he can even take your physical life.
But he cannot reach into the architecture of your soul and extract your virtue.
Beautifully put. Because of that, he cannot touch your true reward. Philosophy claims that this intrinsic reward elevates the virtuous person to a state she calls very godship.
Okay, let's examine that word, godship. That sounds incredibly bold, almost heretical, depending on your theological background. What does Boethius mean by it?
He doesn't mean becoming a literal deity with a universe to rule. He means participating in the divine nature.
Ah, okay.
God, in this philosophical framework, is the essence of perfect goodness and absolute happiness. By attaining goodness, a human being shares in that divine state. It is an indestructible state of being that is immune to the chaotic fluctuations of the physical world.
So if goodness is an intrinsic reward that elevates human nature, then wickedness must be an intrinsic punishment that degrades it.
Exactly the inverse.
And the text gets remarkably visceral here. It doesn't just say the wicked feel guilty. It argues for an ontological degradation, a literal downgrade in the species of the soul.
If righteousness raises a person above the baseline of human nature, vice casts them aggressively below it. Philosophy argues that you cannot even consider someone truly human if they have been totally transformed by vice.
The text uses a series of animal metaphors to describe this internal degradation. It reads almost like a psychological profiling system.
It really does. The expert manipulator, the violent thug, they aren't just flawed humans, they have adopted the nature of beasts.
Let's walk through some of these because they map so perfectly to modern toxic behaviors. First, the violent despoiler. The person who uses aggression and intimidation to steal what belongs to others. The text says his soul becomes a wolf.
Driven by predatory hunger, completely devoid of empathy.
And then you have the restless, wrangling litigator. The person who thrives on constant conflict, always arguing, always suing, always causing drama.
Philosophy says they become a yelting cur, a dog. All noise, constantly snapping at the heels of others, unable to find peace.
Next is the secret schemer. The fraudster who doesn't use open violence but takes pleasure in stealth, deception, and hidden traps. His soul devolves into a fox.
Then the passionate man, the one who is entirely frenzied with uncontrolled rage and anger. He is a lion.
We also have the coward, the person who flees when there is no actual danger, driven by irrational fear. They adopt the nature of a timid deer.
And the person who is willfully ignorant, refusing to learn or grow, sunk in stupidity. They live as a dull ass.
There is also the light and inconstant person, the one who flits from one obsession to another, never committing, never building anything lasting. They are a bird.
And finally, the person who completely surrenders to foul and unclean lusts, wallowing in base desires. They are sunk in the nature of a filthy hog.
It's so descriptive. And this isn't just name-calling, is it?
No, not at all. Boethius is pointing out that when you dedicate your life to a specific vice, that vice consumes your humanity and replaces it with a singular animalistic drive. This psychological insight is beautifully paired with Song 3, which references the myth of Circe's island.
Oh, the Homeric myth. Right, Odysseus and his crew land on the island of the witch, Circe, and she serves them an enchanted cup.
When the sailors drink the potion, they experience a horrifying physical transformation. Their bodies warp into boars, tigers, and wolves.
Right, they grow fangs, they lose their voices, they are forced to eat acorns in the mud.
But the tragedy of Circe's magic, as Boethius highlights, is that while their bodies become monstrous, their minds remain entirely human.
That is horrifying.
It is. They have the steadfast consciousness of a man trapped inside a beast, mourning their monstrous physical change. They are fully aware of what they have lost.
And this is where philosophy turns the knife on the concept of wickedness. She argues that the magical poisons of Circe are actually weak and merciful compared to the poisons of vice.
Yes.
But wait, how can a poison that turns you into a literal wolf be considered weak?
Because Circe's magic only altered the external show. It left the inner citadel of the soul intact. The sailors still knew they were human. They still possessed their rational mind.
Oh, I see.
But the poisons of vice operate in the exact opposite direction. Vice is far more potent because it leaves the human body whole, but deeply infects and transforms the soul itself.
That is a chilling concept. It means you can wear a tailored suit, drive a luxury car, speak articulately at a boardroom table, and look entirely human to everyone around you. But beneath that physical mask, your inner spirit has fully devolved into a scavenging fox or a raging lion.
Exactly. The unseen degradation of the soul is the ultimate inescapable punishment for wickedness, because it destroys the very core of who you are without you even realizing it.
And this unseen degradation leads us directly into what is arguably the most countercultural, difficult-to-swallow concept in the entire text. It is an idea that modern listeners will instinctively reject.
Oh, definitely.
I will warn you listening right now, this next argument is going to make you want to yell at your speakers, because philosophy pushes her logic to the absolute extreme. She argues that criminals are actually happier when they are punished for their crimes than when they escape justice.
It sounds absurd on its face. But philosophy builds a logical proof that is incredibly difficult to dismantle if you accept her initial premises.
Okay, let me challenge this step by step. Walk me through how she justifies this.
All right. She starts with a premise we generally all accept. Punishment for the wicked is a just and fair thing.
Agreed. When someone commits a terrible crime, justice demands they face a consequence.
Next premise. Everything that is just is, by definition, a good thing. Justice is a manifestation of the good.
I see the logical step there. Justice equals good.
Now, consider a miserable, wicked person. If you take a miserable person and you add a good thing to their life, their overall state of misery decreases slightly. They are marginally better off because they have received something good.
So the punishment is the good thing being added to the criminal.
Yes. Now look at the alternative. Escaping punishment when you deserve it is an unjust thing. Injustice is, by definition, an evil. So if you take a wicked, miserable person and you add a new evil thing to their life, the evil of escaping justice, you compound their misery. You make them far worse off.
Okay, structurally, as a philosophical syllogism, I cannot break that chain of logic, but let's step out of the ivory tower and into a real courtroom.
Okay, let's do it.
If I am sitting on a jury, or I am a judge looking at a sociopath who defrauded thousands of elderly people out of their pensions, and that fraudster gets off on a legal technicality, you are telling me I should pity the fraudster more than I pity the pensioners who lost their life savings. That feels offensive to the victims.
It feels offensive because we prioritize material harm over spiritual harm. Boethius is arguing that the sickness of the soul is infinitely more devastating than the loss of property.
It's hard to accept, though.
I know, but the text insists that committing a wrong makes the doer profoundly miserable, not the sufferer. The pensioner lost their bank account, which is a terrible temporal hardship, but their humanity remains intact.
Wow, the fraudster.
The fraudster, by committing the crime and escaping the cure of punishment, has allowed a fatal disease to fester and rot their soul. They have lost their humanity.
So the justice system, in Boethius's view, isn't about societal vengeance. It's a hospital.
Exactly the metaphor he uses. Think about a severe physical illness. If a patient comes to you with a gangrenous ulcer on their leg, you don't drag them to the operating room with hatred and anger.
No, you bring them with deep compassion.
Right. The surgeon takes a scalpel and cuts away the rotting flesh. The procedure is agonizingly painful, but the pain is the mechanism of salvation. It stops the infection from killing the patient.
The punishment is the scalpel.
Yes. Philosophy argues that we shouldn't bring criminals to court in a spirit of rage. They are critically ill. The judge is the physician of the soul. The punishment, whether it's prison, restitution, or loss of status, is the surgical intervention required to cut away the ulcer of their fault.
That is such a wild paradigm shift.
Philosophy even suggests that if the wicked could somehow see through the delusion of their vice, if they could glimpse how punishment would actually purge the uncleanness from their souls and restore their humanity, they would sprint to the courthouse.
They would turn themselves in.
They would refuse their defense attorneys and beg the judge for the harshest possible sentence just to get the spiritual surgery they desperately need.
If you truly internalize that perspective, it completely eliminates the capacity for hatred.
It leaves zero room for hatred in the heart of a wise person.
Because hating a good person is obviously foolish, but hating a bad person becomes entirely unreasonable. You wouldn't scream with rage at a person suffering from stage 4 cancer.
You would feel a profound, heartbreaking pity for them.
Right. Boethius is demanding that we view wickedness as a terminal disease of the soul, one that is far more frightful and tragic than any physical sickness.
And Song 4 drives this exact point home. It asks a piercing question: why do we wage unjust wars? Why do we point murderous steel at our brothers in a frenzy of rage?
And the answer.
The text answers that the bad claim your pity, not your wrath. If you want to distribute justice perfectly, you must love the good, and you must pity the bad.
That is a beautiful, transcendent way to view humanity. But I have to play devil's advocate again, because this raises a massive logistical problem for everyday life.
Bring it on.
Even if I accept that the bad guy getting away with his crime is secretly his own worst punishment, I still have to live in a world where innocent people get caught in his crossfire. If the universe is ruled by this perfectly good divine physician, why does everyday fortune feel so utterly chaotic and random?
The randomness.
Yeah, why does a brilliant, kind teacher get struck down by a random disease while a corrupt politician wins the lottery? Song 5 actually compares our confusion to how ancient people viewed eclipses. We marvel and tremble at things we don't understand because they seem random.
That sense of randomness is the core of human anxiety. And to cure it, philosophy introduces a massive cosmological framework. She creates a sharp distinction between two concepts that modern people usually treat as synonyms: providence and fate.
Let's define the terms. How does Boethius separate providence from fate?
Let's start with providence. Providence is the divine reason itself. It resides entirely in the mind of God. It is simple, fixed, eternal, and unchanging. It is the perfect, instantaneous comprehension of all things past, present, and future as a single harmonious blueprint.
So providence is the static, perfect plan outside of time.
Correct. Fate, on the other hand, is the shifting temporal unfolding of that plan in the physical world. It is the mechanism by which the eternal blueprint is executed moment by moment, day by day, in a universe filled with moving parts, time, space, and human free will.
The text uses one of the most brilliant visual analogies I've ever encountered to explain how these two interact, the analogy of the wheel.
It's a perfect geometric representation of time and eternity.
Imagine a massive spinning wheel. The very center point of the wheel, the axle, is completely still. It doesn't move through space. It simply holds the center, anchoring the entire structure.
That still center is providence. That is the unchanging mind of God.
Now, look at the outer edge of the wheel, the rim. As the wheel turns, that outer edge travels in a massive, sweeping, incredibly fast circle through space. It is constantly moving up, down, and around.
And that outer rim is fate. It represents the temporal world of events, wealth, health, and daily circumstances.
Here is the critical insight. The further you are from the center axle, the faster and more violently you are whipped around by the motion of the wheel. You are entirely subject to the chaotic meshes of fate. But as you move inward along the spokes, closer to the center, your motion slows down. You become more stable.
And the text notes that if a thing can cleave perfectly to the center point, it is free entirely from the motion of the wheel. It shares in the stillness of providence and is no longer subject to the chaotic turning of fate.
Translating this to our modern listeners, if your entire identity is attached to the outer rim of the wheel, if your happiness depends on your stock portfolio, your status at work, how many likes you get on social media, or even perfect physical health, you are going to be violently whipped around.
Because that rim is always spinning.
Exactly. One day you are at the top of the wheel, the next day the economy shifts, or you get a bad diagnosis, and you are crushed in the mud. That is the chaotic experience of fate.
But if you intentionally draw your soul inward, focusing on internal steadfastness, on virtue, on character, things that cannot be taken from you, you move closer to the divine center. You gain a profound internal freedom.
You can watch the outer wheel spin wildly, bringing fortune and misfortune, but you are no longer violently destabilized by it.
Now, I do want to offer a point of discernment for anyone reading the original text here, because Boethius dives into some very ancient cosmology to explain how fate is executed.
Oh, right. All the stuff about demons and stars.
Yeah, he talks about fate being administered by the efficacy of angels or demons, or the celestial motions of stars. For a modern listener, this can sound like a fantasy novel.
We have to separate the enduring philosophical wisdom from the 6th century scientific scaffolding, right? We don't need to believe that the physical orbit of Jupiter is dictating our Tuesday afternoon commute.
Exactly. The enduring truth is the psychological and spiritual distinction between the unchanging center of universal principles and the chaotic, shifting periphery of daily events. The wisdom lies in recognizing that you have zero control over the outer rim of the wheel. Your only agency lies in controlling your proximity to the center.
That conceptual framework is incredibly helpful, but it still leaves us with the painful, specific question of why.
The problem of evil again.
Right, because even if I understand the wheel, when tragedy strikes a good person, I still ask, why this specific tragedy? Why now? Philosophy addresses this by returning to the metaphor of God as the divine physician.
This is where we examine why the wheel turns the way it does for specific individuals. If God is the ultimate physician of the human soul, he knows precisely what medicine, which takes the form of daily fortune, each specific soul requires at any given moment to achieve its ultimate health.
And a good doctor doesn't give a blanket prescription to every patient in the hospital.
Exactly the opposite. Some patients require mild remedies, like rest, hydration, and a quiet room. Other patients have severe, life-threatening conditions that require brutal interventions. Harsh chemotherapy, invasive surgery, amputation.
It depends on the patient.
A master physician assigns exactly what is suitable for the specific constitution and condition of the individual patient.
So let's apply this to the eternal question. Why do good people suffer? According to this framework, their suffering is not a cosmic mistake or a punishment. It is a highly specific, custom-designed prescription.
Yes. And the text offers several fascinating reasons for this.
Like what?
Well, first, a good person might face sudden adversity so they don't grow spiritually soft. Continuous prosperity and comfort can breed complacency.
Oh, that makes sense. You need resistance to build muscle.
Exactly. Second, a virtuous person might suffer to confirm their virtue through the exercise of patience. You can't actually know if you possess patience or resilience until you are forced to wait in the dark.
True. Third, some people are tested simply to reveal their true nature to themselves. The pressure of adversity acts as a diagnostic tool, showing them what they are truly made of.
And fourth, the text suggests that some endure suffering, even a noble death, to serve as a beacon to others, proving to the world that true virtue cannot be conquered by physical calamity.
It completely reframes suffering. It treats hardship not as a penalty, but as a crucible designed to purify and strengthen the soul. But then we must flip the question. Why does the divine physician prescribe the sweet medicine of wealth, power, and success to terrible people? Why does the corrupt CEO get the yacht?
Again, it is a specific, strategic prescription based on the disease of their soul. For some wicked individuals, their internal nature is so reckless and violent that if they were plunged into poverty, they would resort to horrific, destructive crimes out of desperation.
Okay.
By giving them wealth, Providence is executing a containment strategy. It prevents a greater evil from being unleashed on society.
That is a wild thought. The billionaire's wealth is actually a cosmic quarantine.
Right. And for others, prosperity is meant to trigger a psychological paradox that leads to reform. They acquire immense wealth, they suddenly realize they desperately love the comfort it brings, and the fear of losing that wealth becomes so overwhelming that they stop committing crimes.
So they become peaceful citizens, not out of any genuine virtue, but out of sheer anxiety over protecting their portfolio.
Exactly. The physician uses their own greed to cure their violence.
And the text offers one more reason for the prosperity of the wicked, doesn't it?
Yes. Sometimes Providence grants power to the wicked so they can be wielded as an instrument to punish other wicked people.
Ah, fighting fire with fire.
As Boethius notes, the wicked can never truly ally with one another. Their selfishness guarantees constant conflict. So the divine physician will use one tyrant as the surgical scalpel to cut away another tyrant.
The modern application for the listener here is incredibly practical. The next time you see a truly toxic colleague get a promotion or watch a malicious person achieve massive financial success, you do not have to view it as a failure of cosmic justice.
You really don't.
You can view it as their specific, potentially tragic spiritual prescription. We are standing on the ground, looking at one tiny pixel of a massive screen. We lack what Boethius calls the lofty watchtower of Providence to see the full picture.
We just don't have the clearance to know.
Right. Maybe that promotion is the exact psychological test that will finally shatter their ego and force them to hit rock bottom. Or maybe that wealth is the specific sandbox they need to be confined to so they don't destroy something more important.
That intellectual humility is essential. We cannot judge the physician's work if we don't have access to the patient's eternal chart. And this realization of how the physician operates leads philosophy to her ultimate stunning conclusion in Book 4.
This is the mic drop moment of the text. Because God uses absolutely every event, every twist of the wheel to either reward, discipline, amend, or punish. Philosophy arrives at a statement that sounds completely insane until you have followed the logic all the way down the rabbit hole.
Go ahead, lay it on them.
She states that absolutely every fortune is good fortune.
Every single circumstance you face is good. Because every fortune is either just, meaning it rightly punishes and purges the wicked, or it is useful, meaning it disciplines, strengthens, or rewards the good.
There is no such thing as bad luck in a universe governed by providence.
This is the ultimate bulletproof stoic superpower.
Right.
It is a complete and total reframing of reality. If you are actively aiming your life at virtue, your fortune is always good. Period.
And philosophy frames this as a call to arms for the wise person. She tells Boethius that a wise man shouldn't take it ill when he finds himself thrust into conflict or hardship. She compares it to a brave soldier. A soldier doesn't weep when they hear the trumpet sound for battle.
Absolutely not. The battle is what they train for. It's where they prove their skill.
Hardship is not an accident. It is the express opportunity provided by the universe to perfect your wisdom. It is the arena where you convert theoretical virtue into actual strength.
But the text is careful to provide a practical how-to for navigating this. It doesn't just say tough it out. It offers a crucial warning. Hold the mean. Maintain the middle path.
Hold the mean with all your strength. That is the directive.
Because there are two distinct dangers on the wheel of fate. The first is being dissolved in delights by fair fortune.
Right. If things are going incredibly well for you, if your career is taking off, your bank account is full, your health is perfect, do not let that comfort turn you into a soft, undisciplined puddle. Prosperity is a test of your temperance.
And the second danger is being overwhelmed by foul fortune. If you are facing tragedy, betrayal, illness, or deep injustice, do not let it crush your spirit. Adversity is a test of your endurance.
Philosophy reminds Boethius that it rests entirely with him to make his fortune what he will. The raw material of life is handed to you by fate, but you retain the absolute agency to decide whether that material will be used to build your character or destroy it.
To really hammer this home, the book concludes with Song 7, which brings in epic comparative insights from Greek mythology. Boethius points to the great heroes who achieved immortality not through comfort, but through immense suffering.
He mentions Agamemnon enduring the grueling 10-year Trojan War.
And he talks about Odysseus, weeping in terror as he watches the Cyclops Polyphemus devour his men, but then finding the profound courage to blind the monster and secure his escape.
But the ultimate archetype Boethius relies on is Hercules.
The Hercules metaphor is the perfect summary of this entire deep dive. Hercules didn't achieve his divine status by sitting on a beach sipping wine. He became a god by enduring the 12 labors.
The text vividly lists them. He tamed the haughty pride of the centaur. He killed the venomous hydra with fire. He descended into the terrifying depths of hell to drag out the three-headed dog, Cerberus.
And Boethius highlights his final, most agonizing toil, sustaining the ball of heaven on his own shoulders.
The text notes with such triumph, he didn't bend beneath it. He took the entire crushing weight of the cosmos on his shoulders and he refused to break. And because he endured that unimaginable burden, his reward was heaven's high glory. He won the stars.
It is a breathtaking metaphor for the human condition. The weight of the world, the daily injustices, the tragedies, the toxic people. It can feel exactly like the ball of heaven pressing down on our necks.
Yeah, it really can.
But if we refuse to bend our character, if we maintain our virtue and our connection to the center of the wheel, the weight itself becomes the mechanism of our elevation.
So here is my challenge, my practical reflection for you as a listener today. Boethius, writing from a damp death row cell, speaks across 15 centuries to tell us, brave hearts, press on, from the fight, turn not your backs in coward flight.
It's powerful.
How would your daily life change tomorrow morning? How would your baseline stress levels permanently alter if you started viewing every single annoyance, every financial setback, every toxic coworker, and every heartbreaking tragedy, not as random bad luck, but as a custom-designed training weight meant to win you the stars?
What if the gym of life is just handing you heavier weights because you were successfully getting stronger?
It fundamentally shifts your identity. You cease to be a passive victim of random circumstances, and you become an active participant in your own spiritual, heroic journey.
We have covered a massive expanse of philosophical territory today.
We really have. We started with the radical impotence of the wicked and the illusion of tyrannical power. We explored the terrifying unseen soul sickness of escaping justice.
We mapped out the wheel of fate and providence and finally arrived at the realization that the divine physician uses all fortune for our ultimate good.
But as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to carry with you this week.
If we look back slightly to Song 6 in this text, there is a beautiful, haunting line about the universal trajectory of all creation. It suggests that nothing in this universe lasts unless it turns backward in its course, yearning to flow again to that source from which its being first was taken.
Everything has a gravitational pull back to its creator, back to the still center of the wheel.
The ultimate homing beacon. So consider this. What if the moments in your life where you feel the most lost, the most battered by what you perceive as bad luck, the most broken by the violent spinning of the outer wheel of fate? What if those are actually the exact moments you're being pulled most strongly, most urgently, back to your true center?
Wow.
What if the friction and pain of the world is simply the feeling of your soul being dragged back to where it truly belongs?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.